I wrote this song about 20 years ago when we were doing a capital giving campaign for building this building that you're sitting in right now. And it's been tucked away in a drawer for about 20 years. And when I wrote it, I had no idea I'd be singing it 30 years later here for you. But it's a very sentimental and meaningful song to me. And we're going to have a video presentation as I sing it, so I hope it is as meaningful to you. Thank you. Started as a dream, born in the hearts of those longing to see the hand of God. Little worn out church, nothing special to behold. Believing days of glory had gone by. But God had other plans, and with his outstretched hands, we began to see his love unfold. And I found my place here with you, serving together, seeing what our God can do. And I finally know the meaning of God's family. And I found my place here with you. Not so long ago, who would have believed we would find ourselves together here, joining hand
Well, one of the 8,000 reasons I love that woman right there. Good morning. Good morning. Good to see you. You okay? Who's asking? Good to see you. Man, I see some faces I just hadn't seen in a while, and see some of you I've seen a lot of times, and so it's good to be present with you today. Hey, I just want to say thank you on behalf of Kim and I for all of you who made today possible. Just appreciate the sacrifices, and we are deeply humbled and deeply grateful for you being a part of this. It's amazing what God has done in the last 30 years. And so what I want to do today is I want to spend our time and take you on a journey of this church, Ridgeway Baptist Church, now Foundation Church, over the last 30 years, and just kind of share some things that we've seen God do here in the last 30 years. And so if you're sitting there going, great, I came to church today and I get a history lesson. Thanks a lot. This is my last time. This is why I don't go to church. Just hang in there. Maybe there's something here today for you. Let me tell you the goal of today's message. The goal of today's message is not to go, hey, look what I've done in 30 years. The goal of today's message is to say, look what God's done over the last 30 years. And hopefully through the story, you'll be able to make the connections yourself in what you see and hear. Winston Churchill said this. He said, the farther back you can look, the farther forward you can see. So I want to take the next the last 30 years and break it down into decades and tell you about some highlights and lowlights of those decades. So the first decade was 1994. That's when we came here. 1994 to 2004, my wife and I, we finished up seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, and we came here. And I remember when we got called here, or called to preach, the guy who was the interim pastor of this church, Garnet Cole, he pulled me into the office and he said to me, he said, look, he said, this church is a difficult place. This church has a bad reputation in this town for chewing up and spitting out staff members. This church has no money. This church has no leadership. This church has poor facilities and a poor location. And Director of Missions, Tom Owens, at a different meeting, who knew this church, told me the same thing. And they said, hey, you're young, you're green, you'll never make it here. And so I came. You may not know this, but when I first came here, I was 6'3". I had black hair, full head of black hair. I even had blue eyes back then. And this is what ministry has whittled me down to. It's almost funny, isn't it? First day on the job, very, very steep learning curve, not coming from a Christian background and being in a difficult church. It was difficult because I remember coming into the building and I would preach my heart out. I gave it my best. And the people sitting in the crowd, seriously, they looked at me and they had a scowl on their face. They're looking at me like, I could read their minds. They said, it's like they were saying, you're 29 years old. What do you know? You can't teach me anything. And it was, back in those days, I got no respect at all, I'll tell you. I mean, that's the way it was. Every Sunday morning for the first 2 years at Ridgeway, I started out, the last thing I did before I went into the pulpit was I took a big shot of kaopectate, because my stomach was so upset and so turned around just because it was just a hard place to be, And Paula Billingsley, she was in a casket right here Monday this past week. She was one of the church members that was still alive up until this last week when I got here 30 years ago. We did her funeral Monday, and she said to me back in those days, I remember her coming to me going, Scott, Pastor Scott, if you don't do something, we're going to have to close the doors. We're not going to be a church anymore. And I remember sitting in the driveway of the parsonage, just sitting out there one day about to cry, and I was just like, man, God, you called me here. I've done the best I can, and the church is going in reverse. The first year I was at Ridgeway, I managed to grow it from an average attendance of 80 down to 60 in the first year. And, shortly after that, it's like God kind of started turning some things around. We started doing Experiencing God. We had prayer partners. We had faith evangelism strategy, purpose-driven church model. And so we little by little kind of pulled out of that slump. We started growing, and the church went to 2 services, and then we were having Sunday school in 5 different places. How many of y'all remember Sunday school? Do you remember that? Back in the day? Some of you do. Sunday school, let me say it again. Do you remember Sunday school? So we had Sunday school in 5 different locations. Anyway, we'd outgrown the facility and the place we were, so we started looking around, and we found this spot out here on Highway 97. We found 20 acres. We're like, man, this is awesome. God, you led us to where you want us to be. So we approached the owner of this land, a man named Glenn Young, and we said, Glenn, we'd love to buy this 20 acres from you, to which Glenn said, no, thank you. And then we prayed and we went back and talked to him, and second time and he said no, third time he said no. And so we were like, what do? We feel like this is where we're supposed to be, but Glenn won't sell to us. So funny thing happened during those days. There was an estate down in Fort Gibson. There's brothers inherited 33 acres and they wanted to sell it. Glenn wanted that 33 acres. So Ridgeway bought the 33 acres in Fort Gibson. We've never seen it. We bought it and we swapped even that 33 acres for this 20 acres. Glenn got the property he wanted without paying capital gains tax, and we got this piece of property that we wanted. We paid $125,000 for it. We were so excited. And so we were so excited that in a couple of weeks, we had $62,000. Half the money was pledged. And we were like, man, we are rolling now. This is so good. Thank you, God. And so we needed to borrow the additional $62,000 to, finish it out and everything. So we go to the banks in Sapulpa. 3 different banks turned us down. Nobody wanted to loan us any money. Finally, one bank in Sapulpa said, yeah, we'll loan you the money as long as 3 of you will sign as collateral on the line. And be good for the note, which is exactly what we did. We paid the land off early that year. We were all excited. We hired an architect, and he built or he drew up some blueprints, and he put together a model, and he said, okay, here's the deal. Here's what it's going to be. And it was beautiful. And he said, the cost is going to be $3.1 million. You see the problem? No bank wants to loan you even $62,000. What bank in their right mind is going to loan us $3 million? Well, so I was in a mentoring group at that time, a group of young pastors, and one of those guys in the group was named Andrew Rankin. And Andrew Rankin had a guy in his church, an elder in his church, who also was a banker. And this banker had recently said to Andrew, hey, we're looking to expand, and so if you find about some churches you hear about some churches that want to borrow some money to do some construction projects, let me know. Well, so I met D. Sokolowski, president of First Bank of Owasso, and he's sitting, where are you at, D? I saw you. There he is, right there. D's sitting right over there. Yeah, and so I shared the vision with D, and D was like, yeah, this is really cool and everything, but this is a small blue-collar church in Sapulpa, Oklahoma, and you want to borrow $3 million. This doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to him, didn't make sense to their board, right? And so D was on his lawnmower one day mowing his grass, and he was out there, and he was kind of pondering this deal in his brain, thinking about the nonsense of this. And God said to him while he was riding around out there, hey, are you only going to do the deals that you can do, or are you going to trust me for the deals that I can do? So they loaned us the money, and that's why you're sitting here today in part. The reason you have a building to sit in is because D and First Bank went out on a limb, and they basically said, even though this doesn't make sense, we sense God in it. And so they loaned us the money, and we were able to build the facility that we're in. All along the way, God was doing things in multiple people's lives, our lives, Ridgeway, D's, the bank. And guys, that's very much or basically how it is today. He's doing things in multiple people's lives all over the place because he loves us. Now, let me say this. Because we were obedient, we took that step of faith. When we got out here, here's some things that we discovered about this piece of property. This was a horse pasture when we found it. And we needed to take the first 8, it was on a hilltop, so we had to take 8 feet of it off topsoil so we could flatten it out, right? If you've ever looked at this, there's a ridge right over here on the north edge of our property. It's over here on the parking lot. That is how much property or land we had to take down. We had to remove. So we removed the soil, right? It took a month to do. It cost $60,000 to do it. The company that did that for us did not charge us a nickel to do it. $60,000 donated, a month worth of work. And the guy that ran that company did not go to church here. He didn't then, he doesn't now. It was just something that they did out of the goodness of their heart. To put a building like this on a piece of property, you have to get the soil ready. Usually you got to bring in fly ash or rock or whatever. Well, when they took the soil off, they found that the composition of this property was basically perfect. They didn't have to add anything to the soil, right? And so that was cool that our soil was perfect. Building like this needs water. And so we discovered when we bought the land, there's a 6-inch water line on our property line running east and west. All we had to do was tie into it, which was fantastic. We had survey work done. That was the cost of about $10,000. Kenny Isaacs donated that to us. We had crane work done. That was several $1,000s. That was donated. If you've ever been to the kitchen in this place, you've kind of noticed how it's amazing. It's like a commercial kitchen. Well, the person who designed Zio's and Mazio's kitchens designed that kitchen for us. So we had a lot of people giving, a lot of people working, a lot of great things going on. The facility itself took about a year to build. At this time, we were in partnership with Sapulpa Christian School, which is now Eagle Point Christian Academy. And they moved into the building in September of 2001 because they had to get going with school. The church actually moved in a month later in October. And so we were all excited. This place had about 700 people in it the day that we opened up. Remember that, Brian? It was awesome. And so, no, you weren't here then yet. You hadn't made it yet. I just realized, but you were on your way. Glad you made it, bro. So anyway, we opened up in November. That was our first inaugural service, and this place was packed out. And we call it Black Sunday because here's the reason why. You'd think that would be a really cool time, and it was on one hand, but we called it Black Sunday because that week that we opened this building, we had to let our worship leader, he was an interim staff person, we had to let him go for some things that he had done and been involved in. That was Thursday of the same week we opened this building. And so you can imagine how well that went over. And it's interesting because the day we opened this building, having been let go, he sat right over there and scowled at me during the whole service. And not only that, he came back for several Sundays after that, threatened to sue our church for defamation of character. And so what should have been a big day turned out to be, it kind of went like that. And so we started having scandals in the church, and people were leaving, and gossip, and we grossly mishandled another staff member. It was a bad time. And it's interesting because when this building started, we started into a 3-year tailspin. And this church went down, down, down for 3 solid years. What's the controversy of the week? Who's mad? Who's leaving? Blah, blah, blah. And I remember saying to God in those days, God, I am 36 years old, and I am really struggling, very depressed. Please, please move me somewhere. Surely you can use me somewhere else in the body of Christ. Please get me out of here. And God said to me very clearly, don't go anywhere. Stay where you are and teach my people that you don't run from your problems, which is not what I wanted to hear at all. So Kim and I stayed, and we did. And so here's how I would summarize the first 10 years. If you're looking at your handout, there were many lessons, but the overarching lesson for the first 10 years was basically this. Sometimes God calls us to do what seems impossible or improbable. And just because it's difficult doesn't mean that it's not God. Stop wondering why God would ask you to blank and start asking why he wouldn't. And what goes in the blank, do you think? It depends on you. Maybe it's adopt a child. Maybe it's stay in a loveless marriage. Yeah, you're laughing, aren't you, Dennis? Like, yeah, because you've done it. Yeah. Maybe it's stay in a loveless marriage. Maybe it's forgive that person again. Maybe it's start this ministry. Maybe it's, I don't know what it is, but the point is God calls us to do things that to us seem impossible. They seem improbable. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean that he's not in it. And sometimes the only way you're going to see God move in a particular way in your life is when you say, you know what, I'm going to step out here in faith and I'm going to trust God and I'm going to do this. The first disciples Jesus called, he gathered them up. And he basically said, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Leave your jobs, leave what you know, leave what is comfortable to you, leave your security, and come and follow me. No guarantees, no 5-year blueprint, just come and follow me. And that's exactly what they did. And the thing is, you got to leave some things behind if you're going to follow Jesus. Trying to add him to your life is not really what the Bible teaches. It's not a good plan. But I would just say that was one of the things God showed us is just because things are hard doesn't mean necessarily that God is not in those things. Second decade, 2004 to 2014, sometime during the second decade, because of all the turmoil in the church, I began asking God, Lord, obviously I don't know how to pastor a church. Would you please show me? I'd learned some great things from seminary, got a great theological education, but what I did not learn in seminary was two things that I really could have used back in those days. The first one is, how do you resolve conflict biblically? And the second one is, how does spiritual authority work in the church, right? And so our leadership team at that time, called the PLT, went to school on these two questions. And it's interesting, but would you believe that the answers were in the Bible the whole time? Isn't that crazy? God led us to Matthew chapter 18, which is called the Matthew Principle. We studied it, we taught it, and we adopted it as a church, and then we basically voted on it. And basically it got challenged in our church. It's like when we discovered this and we implemented this, it's like word got out and they're like, hey, are they really going to do this or not? And so families would get in conflict with each other, individuals, and so they would come to us and we would sit down with them and we would walk them through the Matthew Principle and show them how to resolve conflict biblically. By the way, I'm sure there's not anybody in this room or you watching online that has conflict in your life. But if you ever do, I will just say to you, let me save you some trouble and point you to Matthew chapter 18, because there's a step-by-step process there that Jesus gives us for how you resolve conflict biblically. And it is amazing how effective it is. It's almost like it came from God or something. It's really, really helpful and really powerful. And I said this earlier today, I'll say it again. Oh, what happy day when my sins were washed away. And when we started implementing the Matthew Principle at Foundation Church. Happy, happy day. Second question that we started working on and dealing with was spiritual authority, okay? We were actually working on those two issues simultaneously, and we studied, we researched, and we discovered what the Bible said about spiritual authority, what it says about spiritual authority. It turns out that the church never was designed to be a democracy. Did you know that? The church is designed to be a Christocracy where Christ is the head of the church. I got a pop quiz for you here this morning. If you were here in this first service, so you don't get to answer, but those of you, here's a question for you. Where would you look in the Bible? What chapter, what book, what chapter, what verses would you look in the Bible if you were going to find how do you organize and run a church? Where would you look? Where would you go? What are the specifics? Where's the model? Where's the template? You'd think it would be there, right? Because that's kind of important, right? It's not in there. It's not in there. That's another message for another day. But here's what you do find very clear in the New Testament. The Bible talks about the kinds of leaders that God wants leading his church. It's all about the character of the people that he places in leadership, right? He's very, very, very interested in the kind of people that lead his body, right? And so if you look in Timothy and you look in Titus, there's 21 characteristics of a godly person. And not that any man, owns up to that. None of us can be that. But that's some of the kinds of things that we're always working toward. So here's what happened. We taught this to Ridgeway on Wednesday nights, and then we had a big decision to make as a church. And the decision was this. Do we continue with congregational polity, which is democracy? Which is where everybody's got a say and everybody's got a vote and you have business meetings. And anytime you have that, you have winners and losers. You realize that? And boy, we had lots of fun and lots of scandals and problems with that. But here was the decision Ridgeway had to make. Do we believe what God says, and do we go that direction, or do we keep the constitutional polity? Well, our church voted to align itself with what the Bible teaches, so we became an eldership, and that's how we decided to do business, how we did church governance from then forward. But that led to another problem. And the problem was, now that we're an eldership, and we all agree that's what we're going to do, we had no elders. So we had to come up with some elders. So we prayed and we asked God about that, and we approached 6 different men. And we asked them to enter the eldership process, which was a 2-year process. And in this process, for 2 years, we studied what it meant to be an elder in a church. And we did what we called on-the-job training. In other words, we acted as though we were elders before we were actually ordained as elders, because we wanted to see this is what it's like to be in this role. And so 6 guys started this process. And it was a 2-year process. 2006, we started that. And here's what we had. 2 of those guys that entered the process, in the process, pulled themselves out. voluntarily. And those guys are still involved in this church today. They're still currently involved in this church today. One of the guys was a new Christian, and he knew he couldn't be an elder because the Bible says don't ordain novices. But he was brand new, and he was excited and fired up, and he couldn't learn enough, so we put him in the process. He loved it, and he did well. He wasn't an elder at that point. He lives in Houston now. One of those 6 guys actually got a divorce from his wife and asked to have his membership removed from Foundation Church, or Ridgeway back in the day. And so he did not make it through the process. At the end of the 2-year process, we had 2 men step forward to become elders here at Foundation Church. And that was John Karasak. John, are you in the room? There he is. John, yeah. And Ted Dobson was the other one. We appreciate these men. During that same decade, later we added Mike Scott. Dr. Scott, where are you at? Right there, as one of our elders. Mike David was added later. There he is. Mike's over there. What do you mean? What's this? Come on, man. Raise that hand loud and proud. There you go. Appreciate these guys. Love those guys. So this is how this church is organized and how it actually operates day to day. It's pastor-led. Pastor Rob and I, we co-pastor this. And then we have elders. And elders basically serve as our sounding board. The elders basically keep us from going in the ditch. There are guardrails, right? And the value of this, and let me tell you something, we benefit from this every single week. If you're a part of this church, you benefit from this leadership every single week. And here's the reason why. The value of having a plurality of leadership, there are many, but here are some of those. Number one, there's no superstars when you have a plurality of leadership. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is this church is not built around any human being. There's no super. I could die today, and this church would not miss a beat. I hope you do my funeral, but the church is going to press on because it's not built around any one person. It's built around Jesus Christ. And so what that also leads to is you have better decisions. Each of these guys that are in our eldership, they pray, they read their Bibles, they have a relationship with Jesus. They bring that to the table every time that we meet and we have decisions to make and so forth. So that's something that how our church benefits. There's no agendas. And I've been in this church a long time. And for so many years, I was around men that were good men, great men, but they had agendas. And sooner or later, I discovered what they wanted. Yeah, I'll be your friend. Yeah, I'll do this and that and the other. But here's what I think you ought to do. And this is how the church ought to go and how we ought to run things and all. There are no agendas in the eldership in this church. I cannot tell you what that's worth. It is amazing. The only agenda is, what does God want us to do? Boy, when you get some people that's what they're about and that's what they truly believe in and that's how they truly live, it makes all the difference in the world because God can do so much with those kind of people. We always take the high road on our decisions. And what does that mean? The high road is what's best for the person, what honors God. What in this situation, the decision we would make would be what would be the best thing for that person or that family and what would honor God the most. And you know what we've discovered about the high road? The high road is usually the hard road, but it's the best road. And in your life, the same is true. If you take the high road in your life and make the decisions that are honoring God and are best for people, you'll be on the high road. It'll be the hard road, but it's the best road, and you won't have regrets on that. What these men have in common, our eldership, is they have a continual learning posture. Nobody's arrived. And there's no competition. There's no one-upping. There's none of that at all. I love that about these men. They're humble. As I said, they read their Bibles, they study, they pray, they love Jesus, and they love you. And they always make decisions that are best for the church. Not the individual, not themselves, but what is best for Foundation Church. We are in very, very good hands because of that. And I love these men. And I enjoy working with them. And I enjoy doing life with them. And I trust them implicitly. It's one of the greatest reasons that we're in such good shape. And I would say this. Here's what I would say. In 30 years of being here, this has been the single most significant decision that we've ever made. Going from congregational polity to an eldership where you have a plurality of leaders has been the most significant thing we've ever done in 30 years. And you say, well, why is that? It's because of that decision, the church is healthy. The church is healthy. The church is not perfect, but this church is very, very healthy. And I praise God for that. Quick recap of this. We used to be Ridgeway. How did we become Foundation Church? What's the deal there? This church, the first 83 years of this church was called Ridgeway because it was on Ridgeway Street in Sapulpa, right? We moved out here in 2001, and I remember staff meetings. Brian, you were there. Mike, you were there, and we were sitting in the room, and we were kind of going, "What? We need to change the name. What does the name need to be?" And we were like, we come up with all these different ideas, and finally we said, you know what? It's God's church. We'll let God give us the name of the church. We were looking at the one-year Bible one day, October of 2010 to be specific. Read 1 Timothy 3:15 in the New Living Translation, and it says the church is to be the pillar and foundation of the truth. And from that day forward, we knew this was supposed to be Foundation Church. So we voted, we changed all that. It was fantastic. And did you notice that we were Ridgeway Baptist Church and now we're Foundation Church? Why aren't we Foundation Baptist Church? What happened? Well, let me ask you a question. What are Southern Baptists known for outside of Southern Baptist circles? Do you know? Infighting? I missed it.
I said casseroles.
Casseroles, yeah. Back in the old days, that was true. That's the good thing we were known for. Southern Baptists outside of Baptist circles are known for infighting and what we're against. And we did not want to be a part of that. So we dropped Baptist from the name. So are we still a Baptist church? You don't know, do you? I don't know. And that's the response we got when we dropped the name. Oh boy, people got mad. Oh my goodness. I can't tell. I mean, the rumors went around. They're no longer a Baptist church. Let me tell you something. What is it that makes us a Baptist church? Is it our name or is it our doctrine? It's our doctrine. It's what we believe. That this, and our doctrine is based on this book. This is what we're about. We're a Southern Baptist church without the word Baptist in the name because we knew that if we put Baptist in the name, if the sign out here says Foundation Baptist Church, there'd be a whole lot of people that would just drive right on by because they know that's probably a church that's fighting each other. And that's a church that is against this and that and the other. So that's why we became Foundation Church. Amen? Some wonderful staff along the way. Brian was with us for 14 years. Help me. 15, 12 and a half. How many? 12 and a half. Seems like 14. No, I'm kidding. I absolutely loved those years with Brian Shepherd. I had more fun with that guy than any other staff member. Anyway, this is not about that. But we had a lot of fun together, didn't we, buddy? Sweet and Low. That's his name, Sweet and Low. If you ever wondered, Sweet and Low. Mike LaHue back there on the other corner. Did y'all mean to separate today? Did y'all like... That's what I thought. That's exactly what I thought. Mike was here 15 years? 14, I don't know. You were here for a while. 14 years. Bessie, somebody told me Bessie's here. Where are you at? Shortest person in the room is on the back row. Well, no, that would be me. I'm on this back row. Bessie was my beloved friend and secretary for 19 years here. 19 years. You know what Hillary told me before this service started? She said, Bessie's here. And I said, great. She said, she looks the same as she did when she left. I said, yeah, if she lives another 20 years, she'll probably still look just like that. She's just one of those people that does not age. Bless your heart. God bless you. Hey, that's awesome. So what changed in the decade? What changed at this church in that decade? Here's what changed. The worship styles changed, didn't they, Brian? They did. Yeah. The location changed. The associations changed. The constitution and bylaws changed. The name changed. The vision changed. The staff, the personnel, the people. Basically, everything that you can change in a church except the gospel message changed in this church in that decade. That's why I look like this. One overarching lesson that we had in that time, and if you're taking notes, you can see this on your handout. It says this: until you deal with root issues of a problem or problems, you'll never solve the problem. You can work on the symptoms, or you can work toward a solution. Jesus said it this way. He said, if you continue, I'm in John chapter 8, verse 31. If you continue in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine. And you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. We had to find out what God says is true about how you resolve conflict with people in the church. And when we did that, and we started doing what Jesus said, things settled down. And we were able to focus on why we're here as a church. We did the same thing with spiritual authority. We learned what the truth is about spirit. What does God say about how this is to be organized and how it is to be led and served? And when we did that, the church settled down, and we had peace, and we had unity, and we were able to focus on the mission of the church and do that instead of fighting with each other and arguing and complaining and gossiping and all that kind of stuff. So here's the thing for you and me. In your life, what you will find, if you haven't already, and those of you with a lot of gray hair or no hair know this, you can either deal with symptoms of your problem, then you will never solve the problem, or you get to the root of the problem and you deal with the root and you find that freedom is there when you deal with the root issue. Last decade, from 2014 to 2024, has been equally interesting and difficult to me personally. Let me backtrack a little bit on the timeline. Along the mid-2000s, I hit a lid on my leadership ability. I'd done everything I knew to do. Everything I've read, everything I've studied, everything I brought from seminary, I threw it all out there. I had nothing left, so I hit a lid on my leadership, and I knew that I had a decision to make. And the decision was this: should I stay or should I go now? Because if I stay, I knew there would be trouble. But if I go, it would be double. So I thought I need to continue my education. I went to Denver Seminary. I loved the doctoral work. Loved it. Loved the seminars. I loved I loved it all. It was fantastic. Great season in my life. I so enjoyed it. Dr. Osborne, the head of the program, first day of class, he got us all, the new students coming into Denver Seminary, got us in a room, and he said, 40% of you will not graduate. How about that for an opening line on the first day of your class? 40% of you will not graduate. He wasn't being mean. He was just saying historical data shows 40% of you will not complete this program. And I decided that day, I'm going to make it. I am going to make it. So here's what we learned is that the average time to complete your doctorate is 6 years. It takes the average person 6 years to complete their doctorate. Wanting to be above average, I did it in 8. Because I'm just that sharp. Anyway, how many of you have ever heard of the dark night of the soul? Let me see your hand. Maybe you online, you've heard of the dark night of the soul. A handful of you. What is that? Let me give you a definition. It's this: a period of spiritual desolation suffered by a mystic in which all sense of consolation is removed. Translation: it's a time in a Christ follower's life when your entire world falls apart and you don't know why. And it seems and feels like God has completely abandoned you. And you have no sense of his presence and no connection to him whatsoever. And you don't know why. Man, this is tough. I remember in August of 2016, I was rounding third on my doctoral program. Most of the paperwork was done. The paper was written. I was starting the project. And in August of that year, I got my first, and I pray to God only, kidney stone. How many of you have had a kidney stone? Mike, you're like the patron saint of kidney stones, right? I had never felt pain like that before, and I hope never to feel that again. So, and what that did was, September, that was August. September, that threw me into shingles. So I had shingles in September. October, I got a call from my brother. He said, hey, man, Dad's kind of sick. So I drove down to Arkansas, thinking Dad's kind of sick, no big deal. He died the next day, unexpectedly. We did his funeral that week. So I come back to Sapulpa. November, our worship leader, who had been a solid stabilizing force in our church for 5.5 years, he said, hey, Scott, I'm resigning. I'm leaving. Not because he was mad or nothing like that. It's just his time was finished here. In January 2017, I was playing basketball, and I'd been playing basketball for 20 years. Every Monday and Wednesday morning, we played basketball, and I loved it, right? And I got to where I couldn't make a shot. And I thought, well, I'm having a bad day, off day. And then I couldn't make a layup. And then I couldn't dribble. and then I started tripping over my own feet, and I had to stop playing basketball. I know how to type, and I could not type a single line without several errors in it. I was handwriting, and I could not stay on the line. I would just go up like that. I also learned that month that we were $22,000 in debt that I did not know about. In February, I came into this room, and I opened this Bible, and I stood up to preach, and I could see the words, but I could not say the words. Do y'all remember that? How many of y'all were here for that fun day? Several of you. You talk about I felt like I took my clothes off in front of everybody. So embarrassing, so humiliating. And instead of you guys going, well, we need to get another one, he's done. You came up and gathered around me and prayed for me and encouraged me. And I appreciate that. I do. March, the very next month, I was supposed to do my oral presentation. I've got to defend my project. And I've got people in 3 different states on the phone. And right before I do that, my brother calls me. My brother's right there, John. Say hi to John. Which you can blame him because he invited me to church for the first time, the second, the third. He's the reason I came to Christ humanly. So thank you, John. So March, he calls me and he says, today's the day. And I'm like, what day is today? And he says, today Mom's going to die. And sure enough, she died that day. So I finished the oral project, drove to Arkansas, did my mom's funeral. Y'all were there. We're literally in the cemetery, and I was hanging onto the casket to keep from falling over. Things had gotten really out of hand for me. April, the elders, I told you they're wise, they said, hey man, go figure out what's wrong with you. So I spent the whole month of April testing. And in May, I got the diagnosis of MS. Okay. So if you're ever looking at me and you're just kind of going, there's something about that guy. Something's not quite right with him. You'd be right. And I have MS to boot. So I got the diagnosis of MS. My wife and I flew out to Denver, got my doctorate, and I could barely walk across the stage all in the same week. Boy, that was a fun time. In June, the very next month, student pastor, Pastor Mike, he resigned, and that was a hard one for us. And then in July, so here's the thing, in July, my health is going, south. The church is reeling. We're doing damage control here at Foundation Church. People were wondering what's going on, what's going to happen, and so forth. And let me just tell you, the physical and the emotional pain and the feeling of complete abandonment by God is really hard to put into words. But nothing surprises God, and God always has his people in place. When Mike resigned that year, it seemed like a bad thing in the moment. But it turned out to be a really good thing. It turned out to be a good thing for Foundation Church, and it turned out to be a good thing for the church inside out. And by the way, Mike and I are good. Did y'all know that? Mike and I are good. Or why would he be sitting right back there if we were at odds with each other? Are we good, Mike? We're good. We're very good. And the church was in a bad place at that point, a hard place. Not a bad place, a hard place. And Kent Choate stepped up. Kent had been on staff with us for a while. And man, that guy, he just stepped into the role. I couldn't do the pastoring thing anymore, and he stepped in for a solid year. He was a calming presence here. Man, he led, and he maintained the store, and he kept the ship going. Yeah, absolutely. Kent. Dr. Choate. I call him Kentavos. But he did a phenomenal job for that year, and the elders stepped up, and we made it. We made it through a difficult time. So through the dark night of the soul, here's some things I learned. Going through those things, I never understood why some of those things happened. Most of those things, I never understood why they happened. Some things I did. But one of the things that I learned was that God was basically testing me to see, will you trust me regardless? That's the lesson. Will you trust me regardless? And I bet you in a room of this many people, and those of you watching online, that is a big question that you're wrestling with right now. Will you trust me regardless? Regardless of how your circumstances are, regardless of how you've been treated, regardless of your health, regardless of your finances, regardless of your prodigal kids, regardless of you fill in the blank, will you trust me? Job said this. He said, though you slay me, yet will I trust you. Will you trust him? He already knows if you will or not. You don't know. That's why you're being tested. You've got to find out. Another thing that you learn going through hard things like that is you go through hard things so you can help other people when they go through their hard things. You can be available to them. So in 2018, Pastor Rob comes to Foundation Church. Pastor Rob, give it up for Pastor Rob. He came in the month of April. So this is his 6th year anniversary, right? Yay! He's closing in on that 30-year gap thing we got. But anyway, it's been wonderful working with him. He came in, I was lead pastor. He came in as associate pastor. We did that for a couple of years. Then we changed, and we are co-pastors now. And so sometimes we get asked, well, who's the real pastor? He travels a lot. He's in a lot of circles. He knows a lot of people, and he always gets asked the question, who's the real pastor there? And neither one of us. I mean, this is gray beard and black beard, a couple of pirates here at the church. That's Jesus is the head of the church. And what you find here at Foundation Church is we're like right and left hands of the same body. And it works really, really well between us because God called him here and God called me here. And what we do is for the first 5 years he was here, we had this conversation. No ego and no ownership, no territory. So it's not about, it was my idea, that's mine, I'm in that, we have set those things aside. Now we have those conversations about once a month, but it's still it's on the table there that, hey, this is not about us, and it's not about power, and it's not about who gets the credit, and it's about Jesus. And so we work really, really, really well together. And we love that. And we have an incredible staff. You guys have an incredible staff. Look at it this way. Gordon Christopher. Gordon, would you raise your hand? I'm so glad you weren't asleep. Gordon is in his 80s. Jackie Brown, are you in the room? Where are you at, Jackie? Jackie runs our office. She's in her 70s. Dan's back in the booth. Dan's in his 60s. Kathy, where are you at? Kathy and Pam and me, we're in our 50s. Some of us barely hanging on, but we're in our 50s. Rob's in his 40s. Hillary, where are you? Hillary's back, usually in the back of the room. Hillary's in her 30s. Watch this. Tyler, Leah, Natastic, and Muscles, also known as Jervis, they're all in their 20s, and that's your staff. You've got 20s to 80s on your staff. So there's incredible balance. That's why things stay fresh here, and that's also why we don't go off the rails on the latest trend. There's a lot of balance here, okay? We've added Nick Klinovich and James Gaddis, elders. Are y'all in the room? I saw James. Where is Nick here? In the 2 and 3 year olds, where he belongs. That's where a good elder should be, with the 2 and 3 year olds. That's exactly right. Good. We've added new deacons. We've doubled the size of our deacon force over this last year. Deacons, raise your hands, all of you. Candidates, active. The rest of them are out serving somewhere, I'm sure. Anyway, it's great. So, a lot of volunteers, a lot of great volunteers here at Foundation Church. We appreciate all of you guys. When you're busy rowing the boat, you don't have time to rock it. Did you know that? Foundation Church is the healthiest it's been in 30 years that I've been here. And healthy things grow. So here's the lesson for the last decade. Here it is. And it really fits the whole 30 years. And it's this. God is, what do you think? Faithful. God is faithful. He is faithful. Jesus said that I will be with you always, even to the end of the age. In Hebrews 5, it says, God says, I will never leave you and I will never forsake you. And you know what? That's either true or it's not true. And you have to decide. Here's the thing. It is true whether you believe it or not, but it helps you a whole lot more when you actually believe that that's true. Well, that's it, guys. 30 years and thankful. It has been a ride. It's been a joy. Kim and I have had a blast. And we love it. We love what we've seen here and what we've experienced. Sounds like a retirement speech, doesn't it? You wish. Makes me wonder, though. If I leave here tomorrow, would you still remember me? For I must be traveling on now because there's so many places I've got to see. Let me say this about my wife. Say a quick prayer for me real quick that I don't get emotional. Say a quick prayer for me that I don't get emotional with what I'm about to tell you. You're not praying for me. Say a quick prayer for me that I don't get emotional with what I'm about to tell you. That's a silent prayer. I know, it's silent prayer. Okay, that's good. We'll go with that. You know, the person I'm so thankful for is my wife. I can't look at her. She's made a lot of sacrifices. A lot. A lesser woman would have left me years ago. You've heard the saying, behind every good man, there's a great woman, right? It's true. Like Frodo said in Lord of the Rings, I wouldn't have gotten very far without Samwise. You didn't pray enough. 30 years and thankful. So 30 and thinking. So what's next? Is it over? Absolutely not. I really believe that the first 30 or the last 30 years of this church's life has been preparation for where we are and where we're going. It's been a lot of toiling, a lot of work in the field. And there have been harvests. I mean, a lot of people have been saved. A lot of people have been baptized. A lot of families strengthened. A lot of good things have happened. But I really do believe that what God has been doing up to this point is getting us ready for the season that we're now in. We are in a phenomenal season. And the job now is to steward that well. We've got to take what God has given us and we've got to steward it well. And that's what we hope to do. And let me just say this to you. Here's the thing. Here's where we're going. This is what God has shown us. Everything in this church will be built on Jesus Christ going forward, period. Every single thing we do. And you say, well, how do you know? And God gave us a very, very clear vision this past year. And he said, this is what I want you to do. I want to build my church on Jesus Christ. Everything revolves around Jesus Christ. All the decisions, the budgeting, the staffing, the calendaring, the programming, the ministries, everything will be built on Jesus Christ. You say, well, what have we been building on this whole time? Jesus and different things, but the vision is coming like this, and it's going to be on Jesus alone. And the reason that is because if you get to know Jesus, you will love him, and if you love him, you'll follow him. And that's what we're going to focus on from here on. And this is not just empty words and ideas and, I'm trying to sell you something. God's already shown us this is what he wants us to do for the foreseeable future. And that's why we started this year with the Sermon on the Mount. That's why we're preaching through the Gospels. That's why we're going to be in the Gospels, because we're going to build everything on Jesus Christ. And here's the thing. If you want the very best life for yourself, for your family, if you're in this area, then I want to encourage you to join us here at Foundation Church and be a part of what God's been doing and what he's going to do in the future, because I think the best days of the life of this church are actually in front of us. And I sure hope that you will be with us for that, because it is going to be a wonderful time, a wonderful harvest. And so join us for that if you would. Let me pray for us and we'll close. Master, I do thank you so much for these good people. And Father, I do thank you for your faithfulness, not just for these 30 years, but you've always been faithful. That's who you are, and you'll always be faithful, Lord. Father, I pray that you would help us today to trust you. Father, I pray that we would trust you with the stuff that up to this point maybe we have had a hard time trusting you for. Lord, nothing's difficult to you. Nothing's big. There's no challenge to your authority. There's no question about how this turns out down here, Lord. Your Son, Jesus, King Jesus, is building a kingdom, and you've invited us to be a part if we want to be. And a whole bunch of us want to be, Lord. And God, thank you for showing us that in following you, it's not always easy. Sometimes it seems impossible, certainly improbable. And yet, God, you're in the impossible. You build our faith through things that are impossible to us when we step out and trust you and you do the possible. Father, thank you for showing us that we can dance around, we can pray about, we can talk about and read books about and do all these things about our problems. But until we deal with the root issues of our problems, we never really solve those problems. And you're willing to help us with that. Father, I just pray that as we go forward, I just want to say thank you publicly for the last 30 years and your faithfulness and goodness to us, getting us here. And I just want to say thank you for the future, Father, that we have with you. It looks very bright. We thank you for this season of blessing. We thank you for a healthy church, not a perfect church, but a healthy church for the reasons which we've been talking about for the last hour. And Father, I just want to ask that you would continue to pour out your Spirit on Foundation Church and bless us, God, so that we can bless others, God, so you'll bless others through our lives. And we thank you for these wonderful things in Jesus' name. Amen.